Hello, welcome to another edition of the That's Confidential podcast. I'm James Preppia, joined as always by Ryan Clark, and we are coming off the bye week. Oregon getting its first bye week of the season, as we addressed a little bit before, but at what seemed like an inopportune time suddenly became slightly opportune due to all of the issues on the offensive line and a couple of injuries. Certainly they put forth a much better performance in Corvallis now a week ago. And coming off of that, and now coming off of this first bye week, the start of not just Big Ten play at UCLA this week coming up, and we'll take a look ahead to this week's matchup with the Bruins, but also the start of a gauntlet of 8 straight weeks of games with 2 Friday night games thrown in there as well. Yes, we can all look ahead to October 12th in the matchup with Ohio State, but plenty to do before that. Got a game, like I say, this week down at UCLA. And then, of course, the Friday night game at home against Michigan State before the Ohio State game. So lots to cover, lots to look forward to, and not just the rest of the season ahead, but also, yes, lots of games after games after games. The only team in the league in the Big Ten this conference season who has to play 8 straight weekends. So we would say 8 straight Saturdays, but like I say, there's 2 Fridays in there. They're the only one who got stuck with that because they also have the second bye week, along with Washington being the week before Thanksgiving, and only 1 game. So it's peculiar, it's unusual, but be that as it may, the start of, like I say, it's kind of strange to say the start of Big Ten play against UCLA, but that is where we find ourselves in 2024 in conference realignment, Ryan, where, yes, a trip to the Rose Bowl is not just a conference game, but a Big Ten conference game.
Yeah, I guess favorable in the sense that you don't have to go all the way out to the Midwest for this first conference game, but additionally favorable in the fact that, UCLA has had a pretty rough go of it to start this season. Obviously, the narrow win over Hawaii to start the year, got blown out by Indiana, and then a loss at LSU. So, that Indiana game is looking like one that, for this UCLA matchup, Oregon would hope to replicate because, obviously the quarterback for Indiana, Curtis Rourke, he had a really efficient game in that one, 25 of 33 for 307 and 4 TDs. You'd like to think, given how efficient he's been the first 3 games of the year, Dylan Gabriel would like to have a stat line like that. But yeah, it really is just the start of this gauntlet, really, of games through Big Ten play. There are the huge ones in there, that comparatively, obviously at the top of that list, Ohio State. And then, going on the road to Michigan is going to be a challenge, even if they've been sort of a question mark. They got a big win over USC over the weekend, despite, I think it was like 27 passing yards. But the Illinois game, too, in that stretch, that game at Autzen Stadium is looking like one that is going to be more exciting of a matchup than people had anticipated. Really good start to the season for Illinois. Pretty tough, physical football team. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to be an interesting stretch, no doubt. The first season in the Big Ten for the Ducks, and one that will include several really high-quality opponents. And these 2 games before the Ohio State game in particular are really important for Oregon to sort of maintain the momentum that they had picked up in that Oregon State game, show that they are the caliber of team that folks had anticipated coming into the season, keep the offense in a rhythm, keep the offensive line in a rhythm, and try to clean up some of the things on defense to be ready for that Ohio State game, because you should, and I say should, win these 2 games against UCLA and Michigan State, but you also want to show a quality performance in addition to picking up those results.
Yeah, before we get into the matchup with UCLA, because as you touched on, there's really, quite honestly, unfortunately for UCLA's purposes, there's just not a lot to it's not a lot of positivity to convey by way of UCLA at the moment. They are quite the mess. And it's gotten off to a brutal start for Deshaun Foster and company, and in more than one area. It's been pretty ugly. But
yeah, it's one of those games where, like, Oregon always says this, and a lot of teams always say this. They're focusing on Oregon. It's Oregon versus Oregon, yada yada. But in reality, this is one of those games where it's absolutely true, because there is scouting involved. Certainly, there is preparation involved, even for bad teams, but this is one of those where they're going to be so much more focused on how they do, and expecting the chips to fall where they may.
And there's obviously some personal angles to the game. There's lots of former players, both at UCLA, who began their careers at Oregon. Obviously, Dante Moore being among them, who are at Oregon that began at UCLA. Some coaching ties and the like. So there are some angles to that as well. But ultimately, again, they're a rough football team. But be that all as it may. Before we get into all that, this past weekend, just going into a little bit of an overview of for a weekend where, of course, you have the bye, so you're just taking a look at the scoreboard and seeing what else is out there for Oregon's schedule. A lot of the results, not all of them, but most all the results, at least in terms of Big Ten play is concerned, and even elsewhere across the country, really went Oregon's way. There's really not too many of them, like I said, that didn't go the way that would be advantageous for the Ducks, insofar as, the Michigan SC game being one of them. Look, Michigan's on the schedule and SC's not. So forget about the West Coast rival and recruiting or anything else. You don't want someone has to win. It's a league play game, and obviously SC was favored to win. And the fact that Michigan's on the schedule is the outcome you want there if you're Oregon is you want strength of schedule to be that much stronger. And frankly, I don't think SC has the most daunting of schedules remaining, to where I don't think they're going to pick up a ton of additional losses, whereas a lot of people who would began to slate multiple losses onto Michigan's schedule, starting with SC, after obviously the Texas performance. So that was one in particular. All right, you knew UCLA was not upsetting LSU. Let's get past that. That would have been truly outrageous. Truly, other than Boston College beating Michigan State, which was might have been one of the few outcomes that Oregon would have preferred not to occur. Quite frankly, even though it's a Big Ten loss, I think it's more advantageous for Oregon's purposes that Oregon State had beaten Purdue, because I just don't think that Purdue is going to end up being a particularly good football team. Kind of similar to UCLA right now, insofar as they're both kind of at the cellar of this conference. I think Purdue might have a hard time getting to 6 wins. And if you're Oregon, you're hoping that Oregon State can at least win as much as possible, win at least get to 6 at minimum. Because those are the sorts of things that are going to come into the equation when, particularly if you're thinking about playoff seeding, how many of those wins are against bowl-bound teams, winning teams, ranked teams. Now, I'm not saying that Oregon State or any number of these other teams may be ranked by the time the end of the season, but in terms of whether or not how many quality wins you've got, that becomes a conversation, whether you're talking about seeding among the conference champions or seeding in general. Potentially, if you get to host a game, if you're not a conference champion, are you hosting or not, versus again, seeding and not, and all those sorts of things. The Illinois-Nebraska game, again, Illinois is on the schedule. For Oregon's purposes, you prefer that outcome. And a game that goes to overtime and plays out the way it did, which was probably one of the best, if not for the unbelievably wild ending in the Colorado-Baylor game. Illinois-Nebraska was probably one of the better, more entertaining games of the weekend as a whole. And you got that on Friday night. That, and of course, yes, Michigan SC, obviously goes without saying. But those two, along with, like I say, Colorado-Baylor, quite honestly, there really weren't a ton of particularly enthralling games this past weekend. you only had like 3 or 4 that were really gripping. A lot of them were.
James Madison put up 70, so that was something. But it was all the results in terms of Big Ten play, sort of went the way Oregon would want in terms of strength of schedule. That Michigan State game. is interesting because I think that Michigan State has somewhat overperformed expectations to start the season, but then that loss, is a bit of a slip for them. But yeah, Illinois, Nebraska was the big one I had my eye on just for Oregon's purposes, because Nebraska, obviously, like you said, not on the schedule, but they're a pretty hyped up team with the way Dylan Raiola has played so far. Really been impressed with, what he's done. But Illinois, I mean, really showing their mettle and showing that they aren't sort of a flash in the pan early in the season. They're going to be a team that is aiming to make a push in the Big Ten and trying to be close to the top of the standings. Now, whether they, finish out their difficult Big Ten schedule well is something that obviously remains to be seen. But that game at Autzen, that is going to be a serious matchup for Oregon, and I think one that the way those two teams are playing right now could be a close one. So, it's interesting to see different teams and how they're starting out the season in the Big Ten like that. Indiana, another one. We talked a little about them last week and how perhaps they might, come back down to earth here soon. But they're not on the schedule. That's a team Oregon's going to have their eye on in these next couple weeks to see how they keep going. Yeah, I mean, the Big Ten play starting the way it is for Oregon, they have a chance to get off to a good start before that obviously pivotal Ohio State game that we'll talk ad nauseum about. So
yeah, and it's nice a start as it's been for Illinois, and it has been, and that was again a great win for them to win at Nebraska. That is not easy to do, given the circumstances, and then go to overtime no less. But they are 17.5-point underdogs at Penn State this weekend. So, yes, Illinois is off to a nice start. Even with a loss at Penn State, they're still going to be off to a nice start. But things are about to get a whole lot more difficult for Illinois.
Yeah, it gets real in a hurry in the Big Ten. So.
For a couple of them, there's going to be, like I say, a little bit of a comeuppance. And look, we'll see. Look, I mean, you got a Friday night game between Washington and Rutgers Rutgers is home, but Rutgers is favored in that game, and they probably should be, quite honestly. So point is this once now that, I mean, yes, he already had some conference games like we were just talking about, but now that league play will be in full force, you're going to start to see the hierarchy become pretty clear here. I think in the coming couple of weeks, even before we get to the October 12th matchup, I think these couple of weeks, even if they're not necessarily the most daunting of tasks for Oregon's purposes, I think there's still going to be the setting of the stage for some separation elsewhere and across the league, particularly in the mid and lower portions of the league. I think you're going to start to see, like I say, some separation become rather clear, if it isn't already. Which brings us to UCLA, where they have, as I say, Deshaun Foster, look, he inherited a mess. You got to be fair to him. The timing of everything, the way everything went down at the end with Chip Kelly, and of course, need not be said by us that UCLA's recruiting had not exactly been spectacular, particularly in the final year or two under Chip, really the entire tenure of Chip. But if you really want to be fair, the last year or two was particularly rough. So yes, they have a lot of transfers, as you would expect with a new head coach. Yes, obviously losing Dante Moore was extremely significant to them, but he alone would not be able to fix all the things that ail UCLA right now. They are rough in virtually every single statistic. They have allowed one of the higher sack numbers in the country through 3 games with 8 sacks allowed. Their third down offense is brutal. Their third down defense is awful, literally last in the country. They're allowing opponents to convert well over 50%. So they can't get off the field. Their pass defense is basically at the bottom of the Big Ten and one of the worst in the country. And that's with a couple of players, former Ducks not just on the roster, but a couple of those guys, Brian Addison among them, who's probably going to be off to having a career season here in what is his 7th season. Him and Jalen Davies, who began his career at Oregon, I believe he starts as well. They're both productive players, and Addison's real good, and in terms of real good by way of range, size, length, and sheer being a safety over the top and pass defense. And Davies isn't bad, and still It's because of lack of pass rush, size, speed, etc. in the front seven, so they're just not getting home very much there by way of causing havoc and pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And ultimately, no matter who you're asking to defend for longer periods of time, it's not going real well. So the defense is just absolutely brutal. Yes, getting torched by Indiana and having a rough go with LSU can certainly do that. The run defense, I'm not sure how much those numbers are. To be fair, I'm really not sure how many of those are skewed in part because the pass defense is so bad that even in blowouts, the teams really have to lean onto the run. Whereas conversely, sometimes you see rush numbers that get inflated the other way because, well, opponents, they pull the plug and then they're only running. And it looks like the pass numbers are artificially good. Here, I think some of the run defense numbers for UCLA's purposes might be a little artificial insofar as when the pass defense is that bad, is it that the run defense is good, or is it just why in the world, why bother? So
yeah,
far,
like
again,
you don't even have to run. Yeah, like especially for a team like Oregon, where Dylan Gabriel was so efficient and did so well in that Oregon State game. To try and replicate that, I think is obviously going to be a major focus. I do think that Oregon will continue to try to establish the run with Jordan James and have a chance to pop one off with him or Whittington or Jaden Lamar or whoever's in there. But yeah, I mean, when you're probably going to have a good amount of time for Dylan Gabriel to do what he did last week. For if you're an Oregon fan, that they don't necessarily need to. They don't need to, rush Jordan James 20 times. They can just let Gabriel sit back and go to work and let those playmakers feast. I mean, they should have the freedom to do that, and I think that if I had to guess, I would bet they will.
Yeah, I simply don't. As for as many questions as there have been about the offensive line, and rightfully so, and yes, they shored some things up against Oregon State, and we'll see if Matthew Bedford does indeed come back this week and what ripple effects that has on the lineup. If it's just as simple as, well, he's back, so therefore Harper's back at left guard and Poncho's at center, and off and away you go. Or if there's some kind of rotational capacity thereafter, because quite frankly, Nishad Strother played awfully well.
Should you stick with him there with just to keep the continuity, even if you feel like Bedford is a guy that you absolutely can trust and when healthy should be in there, like Strother played pretty well.
And the other part being that I'm not sure that it has to necessarily be that contentious a debate because, again, if this game goes as things are drawn up on paper, which, again, as we've said that before this season, and the first 2 weeks were not very pretty, but if things go according to plan for Oregon's purposes, I think they'll be able to play multiple rotations and not really have too much of a concern. I think they'll be able to get a pretty good sample of some player opportunities in this one because, like I say, UCLA is just, unfortunately for them, they're just not a very good football team right now, is the bottom line. And then offensively, we just talked about what they have defensively, a lot of areas that are just weak and deficient. Offensively, say what you will about how Chip Kelly's tenure at UCLA went, and certainly many have. But at least they had an identity. And I'm not necessarily knocking Foster and his staff just yet insofar as the results, because again, they inherited such a mess and the timing was so brutal. However, Eric Bieniemy as the OC comes in, and this even goes back to his NFL time to an extent, and not just to the Chiefs, and everybody can go about that. But ultimately, this is an identity where it is shown, statistically speaking, that they don't run the football. With Chip, that was a core piece of the identity. Now, of course, Zach Charbonnet is not walking through that door right now. I understand, but when you think of UCLA in the most recent years, not just the successes they had, or again, whether it be Charbonnet or Thompson Robinson, obviously a quarterback, they're a long way removed from those players. but you know that stylistically speaking, they were playing with multiple tight ends. They were running basically really power football a lot of times, and they did lean heavily into the run game. Here, they are basically abandoning the running game. Now, again, I'm not telling you that they have all the talent in the world in order to lean into it, but that is not at all what they're doing. In fact, they're doing almost the exact reverse. I wouldn't go quite as far as to say it's the air raid. It's not. But they, like I say, the enemy's had a track record now of a couple of stops where statistically, the run game is just not a very significant part of the offense. Whether he has Patrick Mahomes a quarterback or not. So point is their identity thus far is not very good as a team, as an offense or as a defense. But so far, offensively speaking, UCLA is just, considering how heavy they are into the passing game, the numbers of the passing game are not good. Ethan Garber's completion percentage is down about 11+% year over year thus far. He had 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions last season. He's got 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in the first couple of games of this season. Again, he's getting pressured a good bit in these first few games for sure. So that's part of it. But for a team that is as reliant on the pass game as it is, you look at their receiving corps numbers, and there is literally nobody that jumps off the page, and that includes J. Michael Sturdivant, who was a fine receiver at Cal, and he has gotten off to a real slow start. And even Rico Flores, who leads in the receiving, but like 102 of his 180 some odd yards or 160 some odd yards came against Hawaii. If it weren't for that, they wouldn't have anybody over 100 yards yet in the season. They're an offense that is, like I say, skewed so extremely to the passing game. You're wondering just where's all the production then? If that's the case, it's hard to. I say it's a 3-game sample. I understand, and it's a brutal situation, but it's hard to reconcile some of the numbers that you're seeing from UCLA so far.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely been a rough one for them in general, and for Oregon's defense, I think that seeing how guys like Derek Harmon continue their strong play would be something that I'd keep an eye on for this game. Mateo Uiagalelei has had a really good season so far, and if he can get in the backfield and be disruptive and cause Garber some trouble, that's definitely a storyline within this game for the defense. You've liked what you've seen out of Tatum Tuioti and Bryce Betcher, but to get Jeffrey Bossa back in there and see how healthy he is and how much he plays in this game is going to be a big one for them. I think the secondary will be fine, quite honestly. I think that Garbers has had some rough stretches, as you pointed out, and that's an opportunity for guys like Brandon Johnson and Jabbar Muhammad to really feast in a game like this. So the front seven, how it's comprised, the health of Jeffrey Bossa, and how they are able to perform against a UCLA team that has not protected Garbers well. That's going to be big for sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that UCLA does offensively that really that this Oregon defense has to be particularly challenged by or daunted by. Certainly, again, coming off of a bye week where that they've had time to kind of work on themselves in the first place. But be it all as it may, as I say, it's not necessarily the kind of matchup you would draw up. Look, these teams met 2 years ago. It was a top 10 matchup, and game day was in Eugene. And this time around, you're getting the immediate reaction Saturday night when the game times were announced, the fact that it's an 8 o'clock Pacific time kick on Fox, but that it's an 8 o'clock kick, as if, quite honestly, there was a multitude of options that were not. And you get the reaction the other way of, I love how fans have now gone so extreme as to assume that, we're never going to get a late night kick ever again, particularly among 2 West Coast schools. And when the options were what they were across the league and what the networks were considering, quite frankly, there really were not a lot of options here. I'm sorry. I don't believe that SC Wisconsin was going to be heavily considered for a 8 o'clock Pacific time kick. In the grand scheme of things, that was basically the only other option that was on the table.
And that wouldn't have been fair to Wisconsin fans. And there was always that worry, and that's going to happen this season. I believe Rutgers travels to USC. So like this season, there is going to be a late kick that affects some East Coast and Midwest viewers. But, when you have the opportunity like this, especially a game like Oregon UCLA, where you expect it to sort of be lopsided, stick it in the 8 o'clock window and, let the people on the West Coast, feed into your TV numbers and move on.
Absolutely. For one, yes, UCLA football is not lighting up television sets in general, but when they are, it's usually because in part of the opponent and because if there's actually success. And a year where they're off to the start that they are, and the line is what it is, whatever. Put yourself in the seat of the networks. There is no way. There's simply no way that you're showcasing this game in a time slot that's up against more competitive games. And it just isn't. Now you could say, well, what about, Wisconsin didn't look good against Alabama and they just lost their quarterback and whatever. I'm not making the counter argument there. But fact is that Wisconsin SC is not only expected to be more competitive, but it almost undoubtedly will be. It just,
and it has implications in the sort of upper middle portion of the Big Ten standings at this point too, especially after both of them, have taken a lick in these last couple of games. Now Wisconsin's was non-conference, but still, that's a big game. Yeah.
So look, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that Oregon's going to have too many of these to worry about in terms of Saturday games. Now, I do feel, on that note, I do feel for fans insofar as those who, because you have, it's kind of a bizarre sequence, but you go from, there's a Fox game, albeit on the road and in a better time slot, a Fox night game, another Fox night game on a Friday night, and we'll see what happens with Ohio State, probably evening, but not extreme evening. And then a Fox night game, just not 8 o'clock Pacific, again on a Friday night at Purdue. So I do feel for fans insofar as whether you're going or whether you're just experiencing at home via television, that you do have a stretch here of what will probably be at least 4 games where they are playing in the evening, whether it be the particularly late evening or mid-evening. Bottom line, they are probably going to be playing at night for at least 4 straight weeks. So I do understand the plight of fans from a viewership perspective of those and the like, that may not be your preferred viewing experience.
Yeah, and think about the sports writers, the truly the truly discriminated class of people that have to be in the Rose Bowl from
nobody
for free.
Nobody will be playing the violin for me, but alas, yes, I'll probably be leaving Pasadena sometime in the 2 a.m. hour, but no one need cry about that.
Yes.
I'll be just fine, I promise.
Yeah,
if it allows me to beat the traffic in Los Angeles, I'll leave at 4 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't really matter to me.
That is true. You will absolutely avoid that.
Yes, but be that all as it may, as I say, I touch on it only because we got the 6-day window and et cetera, and of course, nothing to consider and worry about by way of game times for the following week because Oregon already has that set since it's the Friday night game. So you're not going to get anything new by way of information this week for Oregon's game time purposes. Like I say, for the following week, because that's already been set for Oregon's purposes with Michigan State being the Friday night game. So like I say, but because we got that information and fan reaction is what it is sometimes to those things, we touch on it, we address it. But like I say, certainly we have no say in the matter. But beside the point, when you look at what the schedule was and what the offerings were, there simply was not a lot of alternatives. I'm not saying that Oregon UCLA couldn't have, absolutely couldn't have been on CBS. Theoretically, it very well could have. But given the 2 options with the way that UCLA had performed at that point, and oh yeah, by the way, you saw SC just got a national showcase down to the wire, basically down to the final play. at Michigan, loss or not. That's what people are just seeing on your network. So you have an opportunity under the circumstances. If you're CBS, I mean, I understand why they picked SC Wisconsin. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, I get it. Yes. Like, it understood. So be that all as it may, it shapes up for a Big Ten After Dark special on this Saturday. And like I say, then the following Friday night, another evening, albeit not 8 o'clock start, but evening game for Oregon and Michigan State the following week. So, like I say, a string of evening games for the Ducks, but be that all as it may. You touched on a few things there, Ryan, in terms of some things to look forward to in this one for Oregon's perspective, outside of the O-line. And, of course, yes, the expectation that the passing attack be very much in gear. Anything else offensively that you're looking to see from them? Of course, yeah, I mean, given that UCLA just gave up 300 passing yards each of the past two opponents, and that, believe it or not, there are only 3. Even Bo Nix didn't do this. There are only 3 300-yard passing games by Oregon quarterbacks in series history, which is hard to believe, quite honestly. But alas, that is the case. So make your proclamations accordingly in terms of what Dylan Gabriel may or may not do on Saturday against this woeful pass defense. But yeah, believe it or not, Oregon has not exactly thrown lights out against UCLA, historically speaking, although UCLA's defense may not have been as weak as this year's edition, but
a yes. Good confluence of factors for that to maybe add a fourth one to that list this weekend. But the other thing I might look at in terms of the offense is the potential subversion of the expectations we're talking about, where they do focus on the ground game, and Jordan James rips off a big game. It feels like these first 3 games, he's been a tackle away, a shoestring tackle, or one move away from breaking off a big play. And we've seen his teammates obviously make big plays in Whittington and Lamar. And Jordan James has been able to pick up some more yards in the last couple of weeks than he did in week 1. But I think that has the strong potential to happen for a breakout game for him, and they can rally around him, and they don't have to necessarily lean on anything. So it's that would be one piece. The other, for me, would be Gary Bryant Jr., his health, his appearance. That would be nice for Oregon to see, to have one more experienced weapon out there, especially in a game like this where folks might expect the passing attack to succeed. If Gary's back, if he's healthy, where does he fit in? How much does he play? That would be what I would keep an eye on.
I was going to say, that was one of them for me, was really the receiving corps as a whole. Not just, they should throw like crazy and put up some bonkers numbers. I mean, it's possible. I believe there's been 12, I want to say, 100-yard performances, 100-yard receiving yard, that is, performances by Ducks receivers in this series, Troy Franklin being the last among them in the 22 game where Nix threw for 5 touchdowns, but I believe it was in the 280s in terms of passing. Yes, Bryant being one of them, but I wouldn't stop there, really, is just holistically. Look, we've seen a lot from Tez already, whether they target him and get the ball to any one receiver a whole bunch of times or not. It's to me, that's just kind of a week-to-week statistic. I don't think that necessarily has to be something you focus on to that level. But more than, like I say, either Tez or Emmett Stewart or Trayshawn Holden, is there an emergence of a viable fourth option from the receiving position? Again, obviously, they've gone more to the tight end than virtually anybody in the country, and have gone to all 3 of them. So it's not as though they don't have options to pass to. Of course, Terrence Ferguson and Kenyon Sadiq and Patrick Herbert are also in that mix. So you can't say like, they only have 3 guys to throw to. No, they've been throwing to 6-7 guys, along with a couple of the running backs. So it's not that they lack options, but is there a true, viable, consistent fourth receiving option right now? We haven't seen it with Bryant out, so that's part of it. And if he's back and able to give it a go, well, then that's certainly a factor. because entering the season, we're saying, is there a true number 3 between him and Holden? And it's quickly become Holden because Bryant's not been in the picture. All right, does that change? Does somebody emerge? And frankly, does the conversation end there? Because whether Gary Bryant Jr. is back or not, to me, the conversation shouldn't have stopped there in the first 3 games. And it need continue beyond that because, yes, you've seen Kyler Casper and Justice Lowe on the field a good bit. But quite frankly, when they've been out there, it's been either targets to somebody else or a whole lot of blocking for the run game thus far in these first couple of games for them. Are they going to be incorporated more than just going through the motions, quite frankly? I mean, just calling it what it is. They played a pretty good number of snaps at Oregon State, but, the targets and the production just wasn't there. Along with it, another guy who we gave a lot of attention to this entire offseason, deservedly so, because he was injured last year. And we talked a lot before the bowl game because, okay, he's finally healthy. And then all spring long, and hey, he's finally healthy. And all fall camp long, and hey, he's coming off that nagging leg deal at the end of the spring game. So, okay, there's some lingering issues there. But, hey, Jurion Dickey basically has been, forget about a non-factor by way of production. He basically has barely done anything. He's just not been a factor at all in terms of being on the field. So that's one where, yes, Bryant coming back from the injury we know about. Well, not for nothing, Jurion too. If people had to pick who was going to be that player who was going to be the breakout player from the receiving corps entering the season, I think Jurion would have been the selection by a very wide margin because the other 4, like we're talking about, have been established, and he was one who was coming off the injury and the former 5-star and all the rest. And logic was going to dictate that if somebody was going to, really jump off the page by way of what they had done previously, given that he had done very, very little because of the injury last year, all right, well, that was going to be the pick. Well, so far, as I say, it's been a non-factor.
Yeah,
so,
we haven't really seen him. I mean,
no.
It's been, a product of obviously him coming back and getting healthy and, getting right and also competing, frankly, with all of those guys. I mean, Casper and Lowe very well could just be, showing more in practice at this point, and that could change too throughout the season. Their injuries could happen. Obviously, Oregon's not hoping or is hoping that will not happen. They have those 3 established guys, and then the fourth one, the fourth best receiving option right now to me is Terrence Ferguson, and he was consistent and dangerous against Oregon State, and is a guy that out in space can be such a good safety blanket for Gabriel when he faces pressure in games that have way more formidable front sevens maybe than these first 3 teams have, or these next 2 teams have.
And frankly, at this point, I yes, he's probably the 4th option insofar as, because we're talking about true receiver, but frankly, Terrence is, he's second on the team in receptions and yards, although they're packed in there. Holden and Stewart it's all 10, 11, and 13 receptions, and they're all 150 and change, 153, 154, 159. So they're all effectively equal.
Spreading the wealth, yeah.
But I think Ferguson would actually either be the number 2 or 3 option, depending on the given play and circumstance. But be that all as it may, yes, they have a clear 4 by way of the target distribution, but is there going to be from the true receiver spot an emergence of a 4, a 5? I mean, look, we're talking about Casper and Lowe getting out there a good bit. Ryan Pelham's gotten out there a good bit in terms of from the freshman. Now he hasn't had the targets just yet, but in terms of when the 2 receiving core is out there, Pelham's the next guy. So for as much as, like I say, we talk about either once Bryant gets back, once Dickey gets into the rotation, all right, yeah, well, until that day, rolling with what you've got and what you've seen. You saw Pelham get out there against Oregon State there in particular. So we will see. That's one area offensively for me. Like I say, the receiving core specifically, again, outside of the offensive line and any personnel movement there. Yes, it starts there because of how much we've been talking about it. But after that for this weekend. I think the receiving core as a whole and just what the distribution looks like and what the rotation starts to look like, particularly if some guys get back into things. Defensively, you touched on it as well, Ryan, a number of areas that you could certainly pay attention to, both individually and collectively, in a game where they could put up some crooked numbers in terms of a few things statistically speaking.
Yeah, it'd be a nice one for Mateo with the season that he's had. Maybe get a little 3-sack game here, and suddenly just boom, like everybody's paying even more attention to what you've been doing, because he's been there. He has seriously been one of the biggest bright spots for their defense. So
you could pick about most anybody in the starting front seven, and say if that person had that kind of production game, because I'm not sure we have to limit it to any one selection in this one. With the way that UCLA has gotten off to the start that they have, and their O-line is pretty rough. Whether it be Mateo, whether it be Jordan Birch, whether it be Tatum Tuioti, whether it be Derek Harmon, whether it be one of the other linebackers in a blitzing capacity, whether it be Brandon Johnson from a nickel fire situation. Really, you could pick just about anybody and say anyone might be able to get home in this one and cause that level of havoc. I say, unfortunately for UCLA, they have just gotten off to a rough go thus far in that capacity. And whether it be simply from sacks or, again, pressure allowed on the quarterback, because they do pass so much, unless they were to make a truly wild schematic shift, particularly under, as I mentioned before, under Bieniemy, where this is not Chip insofar as, forget about just stylistically. Remember, Chip came in to Autzen in 2020, and I realize I have to remind some folks about this because since no one was in the building other than us select few, it's harder to necessarily recall some of these. They came in 2020 and played the triple option and made that a competitive game. I can assure you, UCLA may do any number of things on Saturday. Eric Bieniemy is not coming out there running the triple option. That I can guarantee you. That I will. I'm not sure enough, but by way of other results. But I based on the man's track record of performance and relation to the run game and how they've gotten off to a start, that I don't think is going to be happening anytime ever. With the way that they, like I say, skew rather heavily to the passing attack, that's an area that, by way of whether it be pass rush, tackles for loss, or the like, that virtually anyone in the front seven, quite frankly, could have awfully productive days. And I'm not sure it has to be anyone in the starting front seven in that way. In terms of the secondary, I'm not sure outside, forget about Sturdivant's production numbers so far. He's, like I say, he's an awfully nice receiver. I'm not sure outside of him how many weapons UCLA really has that are going to be that challenging for this Oregon defense. Like I say, Flores, I'm not looking past him, but a lot of his production did come against Hawaii. Frankly, Maliki Matavao has gotten off to a nice start. Again, a former Duck on the team. He's gotten off to a nice start at tight end and has been productive for them there. I'm not sure that matchup-wise that it will be extremely advantageous, really one way or the other, quite frankly, because, calling it what it is, they'll probably be covered by one of the linebackers in coverage, that includes outside linebackers. You've seen Tatum Tuioti line up outside in pass coverage at times against tight ends. So they very well will probably get some production there. How much of a matchup advantage that will be one way or the other, I think it'll depend a little bit on individual matchup, but ultimately, I just don't see a lot of areas in terms of UCLA's offense against Oregon's defense. I say maybe if they get Sturdivant lined up in a particularly advantageous situation, I say maybe. Outside of that, I just don't see a lot of areas where this UCLA team has a one-on-one matchup advantage on that side of the football.
No, I agree for sure. And I think that if you're UCLA, you probably look at some of the film from Oregon State and see where in the first half Oregon State was able to have success was when they were able to sort of force guys like Bryce Betcher, Tatum Tuioti, and others in the Oregon linebacking core to move laterally and to have to keep up with the speed of playmakers in space. Finding ways to create those type of matchups is probably where UCLA has the best chance to maybe, put a few bruises into the Oregon defense. But as we saw against the Beavers, Oregon was able to adjust. They were able to recover in the second half and put together a much better final half hour of defense than they did, in the first half against a really, as we saw over the weekend, to give them credit, potentially like one of the best rushing attacks in the nation right now in Oregon State. Giovanni McCoy and company, those guys, they put it together against Purdue. Now it's a bad Purdue team, but
that's what I'm talking about, though. Like you say, about identity. All right, now there was more continuity. There was more continuity in terms of the staff, even though certainly the volume of players changed. But they have an identity.
Yeah, UCLA does not.
It is a clear identity. Yeah, that's the difference. That's it. For as much churn and coaching change and loss of all these talented players, and you lost your best guy, and that, but even having lost Martinez in the spring, no less, hey, they still turn around and stick to what they do. UCLA is making a much more dramatic shift, and as I say, right now, again, it's a 3-game sample, and I'm not lambasting the coaches for it because of the way things unfurled. It's way too early to do that. But it's hard to say what this team's identity is on either side of the ball right now.
Yeah, and you can try to implement an identity, but at the end of the day, personnel and execution is 2/3 of the pie. So, they might not necessarily have it in either of those categories.
Look, and we'll see as the season goes on for them beyond just this Saturday. Look, some things you do make some shifts. Some things, you see this every year, and even in the NFL you see this. There are coaches who are going to say, look, it either fits to what we do. Either these players are going to be able to fit into what we do, or it's just not. We're going to go down with the ship. And then there are coaches who say you got to shift to the personnel and get the most out of what you guys are there. You have to be the one to adapt, not the other way around. And I'm not telling you it has to look pretty all the time, but I mean, look at what Kenny Dillingham did even last year. You think he wanted to run some of the things they were doing, including at UCLA? You think they wanted to do some of those things? His offensive line got ravaged. He didn't have a whole lot of talent inherited, and he had to figure out ways to try to put forth a competitive product and win a couple of football games. And he said at the time, we will never be doing some of the things we're doing right now ever again. And they haven't been, and they've gotten off to a nice start at ASU. So point is perhaps at some point during the course of the rest of the season, UCLA on either side or both sides of the football may very well start to make some more dramatic shifts, even if they are things characteristically very much against what members of the coaching staff may have done historically or the like. I do not believe, speaking of them specifically offensively, that you're going to see that dramatic a shift this week. I don't think that's happening just yet. Perhaps it'll come this season for them, but in what looks like it's going to be a particularly rough year for them, I don't think that this is going to be the week. Nor the opponent that UCLA suddenly arrives and has things figured out just yet. I think they're, I'd say, a long ways away from being truly course corrected. Do they have some experienced players because of the volume of transfers that were both already on the roster and those that they had to bring in? Yeah, they do have, particularly on defense. There are a lot of guys who are juniors and seniors on that depth chart. Now, what does that necessarily equate to or the like? We'll see. Again, the results so far have not been terribly encouraging. So we're trying not to sell this game as too too lowly. But it's hard to, let's put it this way, it's hard to build this one as as one drawn up on paper to be extremely competitive.
Yeah, I mean,
unfortunately,
look what happened last time we did that, right? Week 1.
I was going to say, yeah. Look at Idaho for no further. What do we know? Maybe look, they'll play this all across Westwood this week, and they'll suddenly say, we just had to shut those guys up. So maybe. But no, it's just like I say, it's unfortunately for them a situation that. It's going to take more than a single offseason, certainly for Deshaun Foster and his staff to get those things course corrected. If nothing else, Oregon fans, look, you've got all day to watch several other perfectly fine football games, including Illinois-Penn State, which we touched on earlier, which will be the NBC primetime game for East Coast purposes specifically. And, of course, you've got that little thing between Georgia and Alabama also going on in that same time window. So there are a few other games worth paying attention to. You also, of course, if you have Peacock, can take a look at Ohio State, Michigan State to get a preview of your next two opponents. So there are things worth watching. Of course, that out there to set up for and be the proverbial appetizer for the Big Ten After Dark matchup that this is. Or it might just be your entire entree and meal, depending on what time you tap out or what time you no longer are entertained by what could very well be a broken scoreboard kind of a situation, given what Oregon has in its passing attack and receiving core and what UCLA's defense has shown it is lacking severely in this one. But
yeah, my thoughts are with the hardcore Big Ten sickos on the East Coast who will be. I think this is probably the first time that they'll be staying up for an 11 p.m. Eastern kickoff for a conference game. If they truly are hardcore fans of the conference, they're looking out to see what Oregon's got going on, if they might compete with their team, or if they got UCLA coming up on their team schedule, Godspeed. It's going to be a late night.
I would, if you're a East Coast fan watching in the evening window this Saturday, I would suspect that by halftime, you may be paying attention a little bit more to Utah, Arizona than to this one, or to Boise State, Washington State, because after all, Ashton Genty's playing. I think those two might be games that are just a little bit more competitive. The betting line suggests as much for one, and I would say general quarterback play in Utah, Arizona specifically, combined with the Heisman contender in Genty against an undefeated Wazoo team on the blue turf. I think those two might be slightly more competitive games and appealing games to those, not just on the West Coast, but on the East Coast as well. But again, we'll see. We'll see. Again, we like I said, we spoke of Idaho in these terms, and lo and behold, again, what do we know? So we will see with what UCLA comes to the table with. But alas, as I say, on paper, this one does not look particularly pretty. But games aren't played on paper, so we'll see what happens on Saturday. Anything else that jumps out at you by way of this matchup? Anything we may have missed, Ryan, that stands out, or have we been trying to be as gracious as possible in talking about what we have? But is there anything else that jumps out, or is that basically it? And what is, like I say, a matchup that is drawn up to be probably a little bit lopsided?
No, I would say that would be it. I guess a programming note for folks: there won't be a mailbag this week. I was out of town, so I will be putting together a mailbag for next week following UCLA and prior to my departure for the week of the Michigan State game for good reason, with my wedding coming up on the 4th. So the folks that are curious about things Ducks related, have some mailbag questions, can email me at rclark@oregonian.com or tweet at me at Ryan T. Clark. We'll have hopefully a bigger mailbag next week following that UCLA game to sort of look ahead to Jonathan Smith's return to the state of Oregon.
Well, there you have it. And again, a reminder, of course, like, subscribe, 5-star review, all the like for the podcast. So that way, Ducks Confidential and all of our podcasts on the sports feed will populate accordingly right in your respective feeds. and that way you don't have to go too far. Tell your friends, etc., etc. It helps us build the audience, build the show, and the more that we have, the more the merrier, as it were. So with that, we will see you next week for a wrap-up of UCLA, and yes, a look ahead on the ever so slightly shorter week to the Friday night game with Michigan State. But we will see you next week.